não existia nessa no Insper, entendeu? Não tem como, não fazia, estava muito longe da nossa realidade, então acho que poder entrar numa universidade da qualidade do Insper só foi possível para mim pela bolsa.
O grande objetivo do programa de bolsas, né, do ponto de vista institucional, era trazer diversidade para o corpo discente. Na verdade, criar um corpo discente, construir um corpo discente diverso, de ideias, de propósitos, de visão de mundo.
O que eu acho que é uma das grandes qualidades da população brasileira, que é a capacidade de lidar com a diversidade. E todos nós sabemos a quantidade de talentos que estão por aí mundo afora e que obviamente não têm oportunidade. Aliás, esse é um dos problemas do Brasil, tolerância e oportunidade.
É uma realidade mesmo que a depender do CEP onde você nasce vai destinar seu futuro. Isso é inadmissível.
Todas as pessoas que nascem no Brasil têm que ter as mesmas oportunidades para realizar seus sonhos. Não importa se elas nascem na periferia de São Paulo, na zona rural no Nordeste, em bairros ricos, todos têm que ter a mesma oportunidade.
A gente começou a colocar esforços onde estão esses talentos acadêmicos, porque a questão financeira a escola estava preparada para suprir, e a parte deles era trazer o gosto pelo estudo, a curiosidade intelectual, acreditar na educação como meio de geração de possibilidades para eles na vida, e a gente teve o desafio então de investigar e procurar esse pessoal. Até no Ceará a gente foi parar, né?
O mundo ele é muito maior do que essas 8 quadras que cercam a faculdade, e trazer gente de fora, você traz, cara, perspectivas diferentes de problemas, você traz novos problemas para dentro da faculdade. Eu acho que tem um ganho de ter diversidade dentro do corpo de alunos, que é super importante para a formação, tanto como profissionais, mas para a formação cidadã também, que eu acho que a faculdade faz parte disso.
A história do Insper é uma trajetória, as coisas vão acontecendo, é um processo. Então nós temos vários marcos. Um marco importante foi a criação das nossas bolsas não restituíveis integrais. Outro marco aí foi mais gradual, é o engajamento progressivo dos nossos ex-alunos, chamados alumni, no nosso fundo de bolsa. Nós temos um número crescente de alumni que hoje contribuem para o Fundo de Bolsas, o que nos deixa extremamente felizes e orgulhosos. Outro marco importante foi a Toca da Raposa, que foi o primeiro dormitório que nós tivemos aqui no Insper, voltado para os bolsistas integrais.
Para pessoas como eu, que são de fora de São Paulo, existe a Toca da Raposa, né, que é um residencial incrível que foi construído pelo Insper para abrigar esses talentos do país inteiro e conseguir viabilizar que essas pessoas estudem no Insper. Então, é um espaço bastante colaborativo que me possibilita me dedicar integralmente aos estudos no Insper.
O programa de bolsa permite que as pessoas, que esses jovens, consigam atingir seus sonhos, cursar os cursos de interesse numa instituição de excelência. E isso vai refletir em toda a vida desses jovens. Do lado da instituição é muito importante porque esses alunos trazem um dinamismo grande para a escola.
O Insper também é um sonho de quem acredita no Brasil, né? Eu acho que aí todo mundo sai um pouco imbuído dessa vontade de fazer diferença, levando esse senso de pertencimento, esse olhar pragmático para onde a gente vai depois de sair aqui do 4A300.
Insper, na realidade, vem de inspirar e pertencer. Então, esse pertencer que nós queremos realmente colocar os nossos alunos, que eles pertencem à nossa comunidade. Eles, na realidade, estão ligados à escola perenemente.
Então, a gente colocou muita energia em criar esse senso de comunidade, de engajamento, de amor à camisa, que é independentemente de qualquer contrato, é em outro lugar que está esse compromisso.
Meu sonho também é poder adotar alguém como mentora, como madrinha para o programa de bolsas e poder devolver ao Insper tudo que eu recebi.
Eu posso acompanhar hoje como doador, como parceiro do Insper, iniciativas, né? Ter essa troca e poder ajudar pessoas que vêm de uma realidade parecida com a minha, acho que isso para mim é muito legal.
É um grande desafio e nós estamos aqui no Insper dentro do nosso microcosmo, que é ensino superior, dentro daquilo que nós achamos que podemos fazer bem e adicionar valor, procurando fazer o melhor para contribuir para esse fim.
E eu espero que o programa de bolsas esteja apenas começando, porque é claro que todos nós aqui temos um limite, mas ele de fato cria, enfim, impactos mais que proporcionais.
É muito bom pensar no futuro do programa, né? Daquilo que a gente colhendo os benefícios do que evoluiu até aqui e o que a gente espera, o que a gente sonha para frente.
Eu acho que hoje trabalhar com a educação é pensar que a oportunidade não pode ser só para alguns, não pode ser para o aluno que já está engajado, tem que ser para engajar um aluno também.
Tem que pensar grande, tem que sonhar. Quanto mais jovens a gente forma, né, quanto maior a oferta, né, de um programa desse para esses jovens, maior o impacto potencial para o nosso país.
Morning, everyone. Welcome to the launch of CEPAP, Centro Brasileiro de Pesquisa Aplicada à Primeira Infância, the Brazilian Center for Early Child Development. My name is Naércio Menezes Filho. I'm a professor of economics at the Ruth Cardoso Chair at Insper and a professor at the University of São Paulo. It's a pleasure to welcome you all here. It's a great day. And we'll have 3 sessions here. The first session will be made of institutional opening speaking by Marcos Lisboa, the president of Insper, Luiz Eugênio Araújo de Moraes Melo, scientific director of FAPESP, Jack Shonkoff, director of the Center on Developing Child of Harvard, Mariana Luz, CEO of Fundação Maria Cecília Souto Vidigal, Cláudio Haddad, President of the Board of Insper, Silvio Roberto Ascioli Canuto, Pró-Reitor de Pesquisa of the University of São Paulo, and Roberta Ricardes, responsável pela área técnica de saúde da criança na Secretaria do Estado de São Paulo. It's a great pleasure to welcome all of you. Thank you very much to agree to participate in this session. And we will start right away with Marcos Lisboa, who will do the opening remarks. I think you're muted, Marcos.
Hi, my name is Marcos Lisboa. It's a pleasure to welcome here today at this event. Public policy is a centerpiece of Insper, right? And we all know the relevance of the care of education and kids and public policy for the infants in our country. So I know there are many people to talk today, so I let you, Naércio, to convey the event today, and welcome you all here.
Thanks, Marcos. So now we would like to welcome Professor Luiz Eugênio from FAPESP, the funding agency that's helped funding the center. Luiz Melo, thanks very much for being here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Naércio. It's a great pleasure for me being here in behalf of FAPESP. FAPESP is a funding agency that was created about 60 years ago. It has developed to become one of the most important research or grant agencies in the country. That's actually an unfortunate notion because it's in part associated with the miss of the federal agencies, which currently do not support research as we will all would like. In any event, over the years, FAPESP has developed a number of different programs in what today is called mission-oriented research, or aiming towards that goal. To that end, FAPESP has created centers of applied research, or has stimulated the creation of centers of applied research. Today is the inaugural day of one of those centers of applied research, And I was given the suggested topic to speak how interdisciplinary approaches may allow for good solutions for complex problems. And with that topic, I cannot avoid to cite a well-known quote from Mencken, which is, for every complex problem, there is an answer that is clear, simple, and wrong. And the point there is that, of course, we all would like to address complex problems in an interdisciplinary manner. However, that's not an easy task. And to achieve that, and mainly education, as we speak about education and early child development, that's not a question that arises today. Humanity, mankind, faces this for centuries or millennium. It has been said that we still teach in the way Socrates would teach his pupils, walking around and so on. So there has been, of course, many changes, but there are still many changes to be made. And the way we now know economic principles, the way we now know neuroscience, the way we now know a number of different topics may intertwine in this Center of Applied Research that FAPESP is funding in partnership with Fundação Maria Cecília Souto Vidigal, and which is, again, a very relevant topic for us to develop those centers, because in the way we understand mission-oriented research, there must be a client, there must be an organization that will benefit and that we might direct or lead or in some way steer the different experiments and the different projects that are developed. So again, it's a great honor to be here on behalf of FAPESP, and I wish the center the very best in the years to come. Thank you, Neste.
Thanks very much, Luis. Thanks for all the support FAPESP is doing for the center. And now we move on to Jack Shonkoff, Director of the Center on Developing Child of Harvard. Thanks, Jack, for all the support. We must say that the whole initiative started with NCPI, which was inspired by the CDC. So it's very important to have you here with us today.
Bom dia, thank you. Obrigado. Thank you, Neste. I have to say, it's an amazing honor for me to have been invited to this exciting launch, and it really it's put me in touch with almost 10 years ago when Neste, we met for the first time, and Claudio Haddad as the godfather of this kind of dream that we had years ago, and Mariana Luz here for Fundação Maria Cecília Souto Vidigal and the amazing Vidigal family at that time. I just feel that it's been a special honor for our center to have been a part of this. I want to acknowledge Dr. Klass at Harvard for having helped to kind of make that connection. So it's actually really wonderful, since all of our time is limited, that I'm following Luis Milla, because I could, if my time had run out right now, I would say amen and pass this to the next speaker. So let me just elaborate a little bit on what you just said, Luis, because I think it really captures exactly what is so exciting to us about still being a part of this. There is tremendous value in knowledge that continues to move forward. Crossing disciplines is an incredibly enriching experience for all of us. But science doesn't by itself, and knowledge by itself doesn't translate easily into changing lives for young children and families, and especially those who are facing significant adversity. And what makes me so excited about this launch of CPAPI and our continuing partnership with you is the excitement to move scientific knowledge into action, and to kind of understand that this is not just about learning, but this is about making the world a better place for children, and making Brazil a better place for young children. And for me, the excitement of going forward for us to continue to learn from each other. The last thing I'll say about this is that we all know that the neuroscience and the basic biological sciences, it's the same science for every human being in every country in the world. The science is the same, but how the science plays out depends on context. So the biology is affected by the environment. We have the same biology, and we have different cultures, we have different contexts, we have different political situations, and to be able to learn together and have it all be for the good of children is a huge honor for us. And I thank you for being able to be part of this launch and wish everybody the best. This is really incredibly exciting. So thank you.
Thank you, Jack. We now move on to Mariana Luz from Fundação Maria Cecília Souto Vidigal, I must also say that the whole initiative started with the support of Fundação through the NCPI, and since the beginning, it's very important for this center. So it's very nice to welcome you here, Mariana, and thanks for all the support.
Thank you, Naexio, for the introduction. Hello, everyone. It's just such an amazing pleasure to be here today, to see those partners on the screen, for the partners who are not on the screen but are watching, for everyone else watching, just welcome and thank you. Besides representing Fundação Maria Cecília Souto Vidigal, like Naexio said, it's an honor for me to represent the scientific nucleus for early childhood and NCPI, that it's composed of 7 organizations. So the foundation, but also the Porticus, the Bernard Van Leer Foundation, represented here, the medicine school at USP, Insper, our host today, and from the Harvard's structure, the Center on Developing Child, Jack, it's just so good to see you, and the David Rockefeller Center for Latin American Studies. And we have been this coalition that for 10 years are working for translating science. And I believe that, the milestone today, it's definitely part of this process of maturity of the field. And then also, Luis, it's even a more extreme pleasure to formalize this initiative with FAPESP that solidifies our commitment, our long-term commitment of the field with, FAPESP on our side. We know that science that takes long and that needs this consistent research and practice is going to have at least a 10-year commitment at first to develop itself, to bring that additional information and to apply that knowledge in the public policy field. So that definitely makes us all extremely happy. But I do want to make the point that all of us here and the ones watching most likely are the convinced ones. We are probably, the usual suspects that believe that early childhood can change everything and anything, that it can solve even the economy, it can solve health, it can solve security, it can solve all of the issues that are demands of our society. And but we also are the ones who know about the issue that both Louise and Jack mentioned, which is how complex the system is, and what it takes to implement it, and what it takes, what are, the hiccups that we're going to face along the way when we try to make those interactions between different workstations and different ecosystems of our Brazilian Federation. And it takes hard work, right? And so looking at those 2 points, the positivity, I think that the power that early childhood has, but also the complex systems that we look, it makes us just face the milestone that we're living today, this extraordinary one, trying to look back a little bit. And I was thinking of what I was going to say, and then I went like about 100 years ago when Freud in 1909 connected early childhood and put early childhood in the determination of what a person is going to be. And then in the 30s, when Winnicott connected the child and the theories of development and of cognitive development, of learning, to the child. And then in the 70s, when Vygotsky did that in the 30s, and then Winnicott did that in the 70s, connecting, the early years and the theories of psychoanalysis to the connection of the mother, the brain, and of breastfeeding to the basis of just forming human beings. And then if we, get out of the psychological theories and come to Brazil, when did that happen? A couple of years later with our constitution in 88, when the constitution itself in the Article 227 prioritized the child as this is an absolute priority of our country. And then 2 years later, ECA put the differences and this defined the difference between the child, adolescents, and what were their rights and what that represented to our society. And then much closer now, and most of us watched this happen and were part of it to some extent in 2016, when the early childhood legal framework was approved in Brazil, confirming that this stage of life is a priority and that it is important that we have the right actors involved, the right tools to actually make that public policy work. And I bring out all that timeline, not only because I like history, but because I think that at moments, extraordinary moments like this, it's important for us to look at 100 years, but not quite. If we imagine, and Jack can confirm this or not, but from what I've been learning, that, the early childhood development actually left, the benches of science in the past 20 years or a little bit more. It is pretty new, guys. So what I want to say here is that we need to look at the milestone we're facing today with the positivity that we've been coming a long way as humanity in understanding this issue. But, 20 years is small to face the challenge. It's a small amount of time to face the challenges and complex challenges of this complex systems that we would need to tackle. So I believe that CEPAP is going to have an instrumental role in actually sort of, taking one step at a time or helping us all to see what are the best next one step at a time that we're going to take to help the 20 million children that live in this stage until 6 years old in Brazil right now, and all of the ones that are born, all the many ones that are born every day. So CEPAP, like I said in the beginning, as any field of research, needs this investment, this long-term commitment, and we're absolutely commitment to see it thrive, to help it grow, and to have a long-lasting life in our field until we solve that, and maybe can move on to the next phase. I do want to also connect this to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, because in 2030, we're all committed to, addressing the 17 issues that were faced. And among all of these issues, there is the goal 4.2 that wants to assure that every child has care and early education of quality. And in the indicator 4.2.1, it's exactly the proportion of how developed these children are. So, CEPAP is going to have that frame that here at the foundation became a goal. And it's, that it's sort of a jargon right now, that it's what we cannot measure, we cannot improve. So we're going to go after these indicators. We're going to go after the possibility of contributing to knowing the state of how our children are, and of, taking the effective measures to help them to grow and develop themselves. And, just to finalize, I would like to thank you for your leadership, but also to acknowledge Eduardo Marino for the instrumental work that he did in the past years to make it possible that we're here today. And Ana Chiesa, which has been a big supporter, and she cannot be here today, but she is in our hearts. And I do also want to thank our teams. There were many, many teams that on the backstage made it possible for us to be here. So thank you, guys, and success to CEPAP. And I will see you all in a little bit. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mariana. thanks for the support of Fundação for all those years. It's a great leap forward. So, Claudio Haddad, I would like to pass the floor to you and thank you for the support since I started at Insper with the IFB chair and then the Ruth Cardoso chair, and that made possible for all of us to be here at this moment. So thank you very much, and the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Naércio. It's a pleasure to be here. You know, this project, our activities in the early childhood universe, started when I had, if I'm not wrong, a lunch with Jack at the Harvest 10 years ago, and being an extremely inspirational and convincing person, Jack convinced me very quickly of the importance that concentrating and developing techniques and things related to early childhood was. So, you know, coming back, as Naércio to coordinate our efforts, which he has done brilliantly, and this the initial phase actually counted with seminars and other activities, we say research, that we started with USP, assim, Fundação Bueno Vidigal since the very beginning, and Harvard, and now in this fourth phase, we have as partners CDC Harvard, Dr. Class, USP, Fundação Maria Cecília Souto Vidigal, Porticus, and also Bernard Van Leer. In the first phase, we actually involved more than 500 people, being public officials, congressmen, private leaders, and they participated in seminars both at Harvard and here at Insper. And the result was for me fantastic because it yielded many programs that were launched across the country, and also o Marco da Primeira Infância, done by Congress. I think this is one of the best results for any technical and research project that I have seen, here in Brazil. So we are now continuing in this next phase, and this effort actually inserts into what we are doing in terms of public management and public policy at Insper. We have basically two arms. One is Chair Ruth Cardoso, coordinated by Naércio, and also the Center for Management and Public Policy, which was fruit of a donation, a generous donation done by Brava Foundation, and which encompasses our activities of educational programs and also research concerning public policy and public management. We believe that public policy and public management, as many of you have already said, also has to follow science. Science in terms of we need to investigate what we are going to do, what we are going to seek with tools, techniques, statistics, econometrics, handling of data, which is ever more important today because we have at our disposal enormous database. The problem is how to analyze it well, how to use it well to design and then implement public policy. Public policy is crucial in any country, especially here in Brazil, which is a country that needs many things which have to be provided by by the government. The private sector alone cannot do it. We need a strong and active government, but also we need a strong and active society in order to check the government, to really demand the results of the public policy. Public policy, which here in Brazil, unfortunately, is done mostly based on beliefs, theories or politics and are not based on clear evidence that's going to work. And even worse, the programs which are put in place are not checked along the way to see if they are really efficient, they really reach the goals they intended to, how does it cost, and so on and so forth. This is crucial in any public policy environment, and it's crucial that starts to be done here in Brazil. Unfortunately, in Brazil, sometimes when a policy is not working, the answer is let's now double the money on that. Nobody checking exactly if the program is being successful or not. So at Insper, we believe that this is a very important subject, and we are pursuing it, and that inserts perfectly in our mission of educating and generating knowledge so that we would improve and contribute to the development, economic and social of Brazil. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Claudio, for your kind words. We now move on to Silvio Roberto Ascioli Canuto, pró-reitor de pesquisa da USP, and it's a pleasure to have you here, Silvio, at this great moment for us. We have in CEPAP several researchers from the University of São Paulo, from many different areas, and the University USP will be also very important for CEPAP. So thank you very much, and the floor is yours.
Good morning. So thank you very much for inviting me for this session. I'm very proud to be here. And I want to give my compliments to my colleagues at this opening session. We are very proud, I have to say, to be alongside with some important institutions like the Insper, dedicated to a project of such importance. I think that one could probably not think of such an important program such as one devoted to early child, infants, developing child, which is a topic of tremendous importance, and I have to say particularly important in this country. I have just heard Mariana Luz saying that we are talking about 20 million people involved in the developing child. So one can see the tremendous impact that such a program can have. So I have to say that it's a collaboration between the University of São Paulo and Insper. I understand this is coordinated by Professor Naércio and led by the Insper, but of course we are very proud to be part of this. Yes, I have looked at the people involved, and I could see some very important researchers at the University of São Paulo. So if you allow me to say, I think we are well represented. I think we have a very good team of researchers that will contribute to this. And of course, this is, as I said before, enormous importance. So having such an important program, I have to say just two small things. One is, given the quality of the institutions involved and the quality of the researchers, I am sure this is going to be a great success. So just beforehand, just from the beginning, I have to congratulate all of you for such a successful program. I would like also to say that I'm very glad to see that FAPESP and Fundação Maria Cecília Souto Vidigal involved, because these are very serious funding agency, and in particular, I like to see that this is a program supported for 10 years. When one thinks on projects, of important projects, it's very important to understand that we have a stable financing for some years, and that's, of course, one of the key aspects for success. So I think this is a great program of FAPESP, and I have to admit also the importance of the Fundação Maria Cecília Souto Vidigal. So I'm very pleased to see this collaboration between the University of São Paulo and the Insper. I wish you all a great success, and on behalf of the University of São Paulo, thank you for the opportunity for this collaboration between our institutions, and congratulations for for taking this project, putting together such an important project. And I wish you all a very great success on my own behalf and on behalf of the professor, our president, Professor Vahan Gopian. I give you all a great success for all of you. Thank you very much for participation, and I will try to accompany this project along the years. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Silvio. USP will be very important for CEPAP for sure. I would like also now to invite Roberta Ricardis. She's the person responsible for basic attention at the Health Secretary of the state of São Paulo. And of course, we will carry out our research here in São Paulo, mainly in the municipalities. And it's very important that Roberta is here representing the state secretary for health. And so she's going to speak in Portuguese. Thanks, Roberta, very much.
Bom dia a todos.
Good morning, everyone.
Quero agradecer o convite de estar aqui hoje nesse evento, onde é marco para nós, dentro deste país, ter centro brasileiro de pesquisa em desenvolvimento infantil, então é extremamente importante essa participação aqui. Eu queria fazer algumas colocações para falar para vocês que o desenvolvimento infantil, essa preocupação, existe dentro do Estado desde 2013, quando a gente incorporou esse tema no nosso programa estadual de saúde. Esse tema ele surge junto com uma parceria com a Fundação Maria Cecília Souto Vidigal. E era desafio enorme para o Estado a implantação do programa, que era a proposta intersetorial em 101 municípios do Estado. A gente nunca tinha feito nada nesse tema,
done it. We had never approached
e nos deparamos com essa proposta. Foi um grande desafio que colocamos para frente e foram surgindo frutos nesse decorrer dos anos, dessas parcerias, e outros parceiros foram aparecendo no decorrer dos anos. Esse curso, esse programa hoje continua ainda no Estado, sendo implantado e implementado em outros municípios. Ele conta com a participação e execução da saúde, mas agrega profissionais municipais da rede saúde, educação
organized by the Health Secretariat, but we also included other secretariats, such as education and social work.
Para a criança do nosso
It's an extremely
important
program for the state of São Paulo, and we understand that
compreendam a importância do desenvolvimento infantil, facilita a temática e desenvolver ações dentro do nosso território e nos municípios. Recentemente também fizemos uma parceria com a Faculdade de Enfermagem da USP, onde formamos 35 profissionais da rede municipal, especialistas em desenvolvimento infantil. Outro curso que a gente teve recente foi de capacitação com 135 profissionais gestores do Estado nas pastas de saúde,
managers in the secretariats of health, education
social,
and social work.
Instruindo eles e capacitando eles para falar dessa temática junto aos municípios, apoiando iniciativas locais ou regionais existentes. A gente acredita que com isso a gente fortalece esse trabalho.
We will strengthen
esse momento para nós é importante, pensando que lá atrás, em 2015, a nível nacional foi lançada uma política de assistência integral à saúde da criança, e um dos eixos existentes nessa política é o desenvolvimento infantil. O trabalho intersetorial dessa criança dentro de um território, como executar isso e de que forma melhor estabelecer isso. Naquela época, a gente já discutia qual instrumento, né, que a gente poderia utilizar para ter todas essas informações existentes dentro de um território, onde essa criança circula, né, onde que todos os profissionais pudessem agregar informações e trabalhar com esse instrumento. Na época, nós pensamos na caderneta, que até então era a caderneta da saúde da criança, como um instrumento agregador, né, desses conhecimentos e dessas avaliações existentes. E agora, recentemente, a gente acredita que esse instrumento pode, sim, ser um instrumento de validação para esse trabalho, quando essa caderneta ela passa a incorporar outros atores, não só o profissional da saúde, mas sim profissionais da educação e assistência social, né? Então, na última revisão que nós tivemos da caderneta, ela passa a ser caderneta da criança, ela deixa de ser a caderneta de saúde da criança e passa a ser a caderneta da criança. Dentro dessa caderneta, vários temas de desenvolvimento infantil foram introduzidos, inclusive o instrumento de avaliação do desenvolvimento infantil. Esse projeto, né, de pesquisa para nós é importante porque a gente encontra assim, um instrumento, né, que a gente iria usar validado para ver esse desenvolvimento infantil. E aí a gente tem essa caderneta que pode ser validada assim, como esse instrumento, que ele traz um rico, né, conteúdo dessa criança dentro desse território onde ela circula, agregando responsabilidades, né, e ações para todos os profissionais que ali estão presentes, né. Então, eu acredito que essa parceria que nós estamos aqui hoje, né, fazendo de trabalho junto a esse centro, FAPESP, estando junto, Fundação Maria Cecília Souto Vidigal, Insper, enfim, é um rico e enorme benefício que nós vamos trazer para todas as crianças dentro do nosso território. Obrigada.
Thank you very much, Roberta. I would like to thank all of you for supporting. It wouldn't be possible to have such a new initiative, a new center dedicated to early child development without the support of all of you. So it's a big team. I hope you stay with us. And we now move on to the second panel. Roberta, please can you move?
Dos professores, nosso presidente.
We now move on to the next session. And the next session will be coordinated by Marcia Castro. And we will have the presence of Flávio Cunha, Dana McCoy, and Aisha. So thanks very much for the presence of all of you. And I hope you can all continue supporting the center with the new activities. And let's move on to the next session, and will be coordinated by Marcia Castro. Thanks Marcia, Aisha, Dana, and Flavio. They're all leading researchers in the area of health and early child development. And I'm sure we're going to learn a lot about things that we can also do in the new center. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Naércio. Bom dia, good morning, everyone. It's an honor to participate in the launching of the Brazilian Center for Early Childhood, a center that really stems from the tireless effort of many whose seed was planted about a decade ago, as Jack and Claudio mentioned before. And this seed was planted through conversations, collaborations, partnerships between Harvard and Brazilian academic institutions and foundations, such as the Maria Cecília Souto Vidigal. The center is an important asset for early childhood in Brazil and globally. So we wanted to have an informative discussion on global perspectives and Brazilian challenges for child development. And for that, we have three absolutely stellar scholars to discuss with us. So first, Aisha Yousefzai is Associate Professor of Global Health at the Harvard Tia Chin School of Public Health. Her research focuses on intervention and implementation science to promote the well-being of children and the stability of families among disadvantaged and vulnerable populations in low and middle-income countries. Her work elucidates for whom interventions work, under what circumstances, and how systems modifications and coordination can effectively support integration and scale up. She's one of the key references in home visiting programs to improve early childhood development. Dayla Charles McCoy is Associate Professor at Harvard Graduate School of Education. Her work focuses on understanding the ways that poverty-related risk factors in children's home, school, and neighborhood environments affect the development of their cognitive and social-emotional skills in early childhood. She's also interested in the development, refinement, and evaluation of early intervention programs designed to promote positive development and resilience in young children, particularly in terms of their self-regulation and executive function. Third, we have Flávio Cunha, Professor of Economics at Bryce University, Research Associate at the Population Studies Center at the University of Pennsylvania, Faculty Research Fellow at the National Bureau of Economic Research, and Research Associate at Rede de Economia Aplicada. His teaching and research fields are labor economics and economics of education, with a special emphasis on human capital formation. He's also studied the importance of investments in cognitive and non-cognitive skills in explaining the heterogeneity that determines labor market inequality. So here we are. We have public health, education, and economics. So let's start from the beginning, folks. Why is early childhood so important? Aisha, take it over.
Thank you so much, Marcia. So I'd like to begin really just by highlighting some of the key foundational pieces of evidence that we know about children's early development. First of all, in terms of the scale of the challenge, which we have been sort of familiar with since 2007, and we know that about 43% of the world's under fives are off track or unlikely to meet their developmental potential in those first 5 years of life. And it's important to recognize that is not their failing, but really ours as a society, as a community, on how well we are able to support children and their caregivers in disadvantaged settings. The second piece of information that we know very well is that this has long-term implications. So we know that this doesn't just matter for the early years, but it matters for your health outcomes, your physical and your mental health outcomes, your productivity, your citizenship, and your educational attainment over the life course. And finally, we also know from the few studies that we have that it is more cost efficient and more cost effective to intervene early than to intervene later with remedial interventions. But I think what we are left with is still this challenge of inequity. So who are our programs reaching? Who are they not reaching? And how well are we serving the most vulnerable within our communities?
I was not unmuted. So if inequity is important, when we talk about Brazil, that's extremely important. We cannot talk about anything in Brazil without addressing that. So Dana, why is it important?
Well, I think Aisha has done a fantastic job at providing some of the basic facts about early childhood development and its importance. I typically answer this question by talking about the literature, the academic literature from three different areas. The first is one piece of evidence that Aisha mentioned, which is from economics. So we know from a broad base of research that the economic return on investment that we get for early childhood interventions is far greater than the investments or the return on investment investment that we get from programs later in life. It's never too late to intervene, so it's always good to have social investments, public investments in individual well-being across the life course. It's simply greater and has a larger return early in life. So that's economics. Another area is the evidence that we're seeing from neuroscience. So there's been increasing body of evidence to show that early childhood, these first critical years of life, including all the way from conception until school entry, is a period in which the brain is particularly sensitive to environmental inputs as well as biological inputs. It's also the period of development in which the basic architecture of the brain is laid. And that relates to the third piece of evidence, which is coming from psychology and education, which is that the skills that children are developing early on in life are really the foundational skills on which their later learning and achievement and health and well-being are laid. So how to get along with others, how to solve complex problems, how to focus attention, how to avoid impulsivity, how to control aggressive impulses. All of these are really basic skills that we learn early on in life, thanks to not only the sort of brain development that we're having, but also the environmental inputs from our parents, from our schools, from our communities. So without that environmental input, without those positive supports early on in life, it makes it really difficult for children to develop those basic skills.
Wonderful, thank you. Flavio.
It's an honor for me to be here. Thank you so much for many reasons. One is Marcos Lisboa was key in getting me to be inspired to do a PhD in economics. And I don't think that I would have done it if it weren't for people like Marcos Lisboa. Second is I wasn't really thinking of doing anything in early childhood until really very late in my PhD. And so it took a little longer. And I wouldn't have completed it if it weren't for Claudio Haddad's generous grant that allowed me to continue to study. So having this center at Insper and being invited here is just for me amazing, really amazing. And then third, what can I say when I am in a panel with Marcia Castro, Aisha Yusuf Say, and Dana McCoy? There's not much that I can say. I'll try to play the economist and then say that what do we know about the importance of early childhood in economics? Well, number one is inequality in wage income, labor market income. 60 to 80% of that inequality is explained by inequality in human capital that arises before we actually join the labor market. And the process to form that human capital, economic theory now, and with lots of evidence from empirical studies, has pointed out that it's a process, this formation of human capital is a process that has two properties, one of which is what Dana has just alluded to, which we economists call self-productivity of skills, which is the skills that we produce in early stages of the life cycle really are a foundation for the other skills that we're going to produce in later stages of the life cycle. And the second property is what we call dynamic complementarity, which is the adult human capital is not simply the summation of a sequence of investments, because these investments are synergistic. Investments that we make in early childhood, they actually complement and magnify the impact of investments that we make in other stages of the life cycle. And this is why, from an economics point of view, early investments are so key to produce adult human capital. And in the long run, economic theory shows that it's really innovation that is the source of long-run economic growth. And technological innovation is truly just the product of human minds, which you don't have if you don't have human capital. So I think that that's, from the economics point of view, the case for early childhood development.
Wonderful. So let's think about all this knowledge being produced. We have the Center on the Development Child at Harvard. We have all the efforts from NCPI in Brazil. So how has science contributed to early childhood development? And particularly, how should science continue to contributing to early childhood development moving forward? And if you can use some concrete examples, that would be great. So I want to start with Dana now.
Sure. So I think the first way that science has contributed to early childhood development, first and foremost, and sort of building on, I love the history that Mariana gave about the theories of child development, which have been around for a really long time. But I think Mariana is right that we haven't had the empirical and academic evidence, the sort of rigorous research to back up those theories until relatively recently. So I think one way that science has really shaped early child development is through attaching sort of scientific evidence to the ways in which we are seeing these inequities early on in life. We are seeing the ways that the environment shapes children's development. We're seeing the way that poverty and violence are affecting the brain and affecting skill development early in life. And in many ways, that evidence about sort of a negative evidence about how these factors of adversity or vulnerability or risk are shaping child development has brought a lot of attention to these issues globally, which I think is the first sort of key contribution of science. That, unfortunately, is a relatively negative story about how children are facing these vulnerabilities, they're facing these risks. But I think in more recent years, we've seen a real shift away from just thinking about the negative story towards thinking about, okay, well, how do we intervene? How do we promote well-being? So I have seen over the past 10 years or so, huge academic literature that is coming about how to develop positive strengths-based interventions for children and their families and their schools and their communities. So I think that the ways that I see the future going is less about this deficit orientation, all of the challenges that children are facing, and shifting more towards thinking about what is the scientific evidence about what programs work for children, for whom those programs work, why they work, what are the mechanisms that underlie them, and then how we bring them to scale. So we're in the middle of this right now as a field grappling with these challenges. We are making good progress. We have a long, long way to go in terms of making impact. But I think that this is the direction that I see us going as a field in the near future.
Yeah, so figuring out what works for whom, and particularly putting this at scale, that's a challenge for so many fields. I mean, we still don't know exactly how to do this overall in public health. So I want to bring Aisha to share your thoughts on this.
Thank you so much. And I will build on Dana's points there, in that the science has really informed us about the sorts of interventions that work for young children. And in this recent time period, this relatively recent time period of 10 to 15 years, we've seen an incredible number of randomized controlled trials around the world, where we've seen that consistently that these interventions can produce medium-sized effects, medium-sized impacts on children's development. And we've also been successful in translating that knowledge, that scientific knowledge, into fostering a growth in policies around the world to support children's development, as well as investment in programs. But what we haven't seen is exactly that point. How do these interventions then work at scale? So I think in addition to Dana's questions about the circumstances in which interventions work, I think a part of our success has been we've seen these wonderful models get scaled up very rapidly. The Happy Child program in Brazil is an example of that. But we still need to evaluate and understand from those programs what's working at scale, what's not, and what are the levers or the levers in scale, the pillars that we need to work more on, such as how do we develop the competencies of the workforce, of our community health professionals, our community health agents, to be able to deliver effectively on parenting interventions? How do we get multi-sector coordination? Because child development isn't just a responsibility of education alone or health alone or social protection alone, but it's about how these three areas and others work together. And similarly, how do we use data in real time? So it's not just enough to collect data about programs, the monitoring indicators we have, but how does that learning feed back into quality improvements of our interventions?
So I'm glad you mentioned this, because I mean, Brazil has a sheer amount of data, not necessarily all being used as it should, not necessarily informing policies as it should. And I think the center will have an important role on this, which is to try to digest all this data available out there and make good use of it. Because, I mean, some countries don't have any data. We do have it and we don't use it. So Flávio, I want to bring you in. What's your take on that?
So I think I couldn't agree more with Dana and Aisha. I will say the following. There is another aspect of the problem that doesn't get discussed as much in science, which is the aspect of is the public system in Brazil, is the public sector in Brazil ready for implementing innovation? And I think that it's a major difficulty because the public sector, and that's true also for the United States, has a lot of constraints, operates under a lot of constraints that we scientists actually don't. So we have a much easier time to implement a randomized control trial than actually implement a partnership with the public sector to work on long-term improvements in public policy. And part of it is because the public sector in Brazil, in the United States, the data that, for example, we collect in the public sector, a lot of it is for compliance, not for evaluation. They want to make sure that the money was used in the way that it was supposed to be used, but they actually do not necessarily measure outcomes about the policies that the policies are supposed to produce, which is why it goes back to the point of Claudio Haddad's that we don't know if the program is actually producing the impact, but let's just double the amount of money that we're allocating to it. So there is this other side of the problem, which is to really rethink the public sector. That's a much bigger problem. But I think that scientists can contribute to that, how to reshape the mindset from a mindset of compliance to a mindset of impact. I think that that's an experience that we have and we can do. That's the reason why we created the Texas Policy Lab here at Rice University. We have these long-term partnerships with state agencies and also local government agencies. And I think CEPAP, should also form these long-term partnerships to influence public policy, innovation in public policy. Because really, this is the gap right now in terms of taking innovations to scale, I would think.
Can you just say a few words how this lab is integrating with the public policy and trying to advance action?
Yeah, so it's a completely different approach because we start with the questions that the public sector has. What is it that you want to innovate? And what is preventing you from implementing that innovation? And then we work with them to implement the innovation that they see as immediate in their sense. So it's completely shaping the question from science. It's not to say that it's better or worse, because I think that science has to advance theory and empirics. We have to continue to do that job. But at the same time, we need to approach the innovation in public policy and really think of long-term partnership with agencies, right? So we're going to work together on a 10-year plan to address the following problems. Number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. And unfortunately, most of the situation that arises, Marcia, is that the data that they have are data for compliance, not data for evaluation. So it's a lot of data that someone, I'm sure, in the state legislature is checking. Okay, we allocated 213,867,193.47 cents. Have they spent that money exactly as they should, or have they not? And we know nothing about impact. So shifting this reporting is the number one thing that we usually do in our partnerships. When we started it, I had no idea that that's the job that I was going to do, but we're doing a lot of it. We have teams of people that the only thing that they do is to say, let's now shift increase the amount of data you're already collecting, so we can now learn about what's working and what's not working. But it's a conversation it's an investment. You need to actually have this partnership for many years so that you can bear the fruits later on.
Right. So focus on the child, not on the money, right? It's all about priorities, I guess.
And it's a big surprise, right? To many people, it's like, oh, yeah, right.
Well, I'm glad you are there and trying to open their eyes for that. So, okay, so let's talk about the state of early childhood development globally and how Brazil fits in. And what are Brazil's main challenges for early childhood development? And I'm going to start with you, Flávio, on this one.
Okay, let me be really fast because I think that the challenges, I see some commonalities in challenges in Brazil and the United States. I think number one is, workforce. We don't actually invest in the workforce in early childhood as we should invest. So I'm talking about the workforce in childcare programs. I'm talking about the workforce in our amazing system of social assistance that we have, the SUAS, right? So they are present all over the country, and the individuals working with young children are not individuals that are actually the permanent public sector employees. They tend to be these guys that are temporary workers, and they have a very high turnover. That's really difficult for us to scale programs. And I think that the same thing happened. I see exactly the same challenges in the United States. Very high turnover rates. It's impossible to train and capacitate the workforce, and so on and so forth. And I'll stop there.
Okay, Aisha.
Thank you. So I'm going to start just by highlighting where I think some of the strengths are that I see as an outsider to Brazil. And I think that Brazil is sort of a global model there in terms of thinking around those interlinkages between the promotion of children's development and the need to have this connected with social protection. So having the Bolsa Familia as a platform for making those connections is super important. I think there has been, over the recent years, an incredible amount of advocacy and communication efforts, which have led to centers of excellence like this one today launching, which is also needed around the world. And I think that serves as a model for accelerating research from diverse settings around the world. So I think that is important to support and to continue. And I also think that the fact that there has been enough support in country to rapidly move forward with programs like the Criança Feliz, and I'm so sorry about the pronunciation. That
was perfect.
Okay, thank you. Programs are good. But then that brings me to where Flávio was highlighting. How do we then get to the nuts and bolts of improving the impact and generating new knowledge? And I would say I very much agree with Flávio in terms of workforce development and building on the competencies of the workforce to deliver on early childhood development and having more research that happens in real world systems. That implementation level of research is important. I also want to highlight that we don't know all the answers. There's still a lot of scope for knowledge generation. And I would say that there are two areas that I think are particularly important that we need to address as major gaps around the world. The first is we see child development as a women's issue. And we don't think about this in terms of gender equity. So at multiple levels in terms of how we think about parental leave, how we think about participation of families in the workforce, how we think about men's involvement in parenting programs. These are all gaps in our knowledge and our science, and we need to be able to ask questions around that. And the second is who our programs are not serving. And I feel that while we talk about inclusion and equity in child development, we have negligible research and evidence on how to best support children with developmental delays and disabilities. And I think that's been the real left behind category in the global agenda for child development.
And if you think in the context of Brazil, we have an entire generation of children born with problems, congenital problems due to Zika virus. That's not a negligible number, and not necessarily those children are receiving, the support they should to maximize their outcomes in terms of human capital. So, Dana.
I'll just build on and reinforce what Flavio and Aisha have already said, which I think they both provided really fantastic summaries. And starting with the strengths of the Brazilian early childhood space, I will say, again, as an outsider, I see Brazil as a real leader in the sort of prioritization of early childhood as a period of development in which there is incredible social care and social investment. I think that as a culture, as much as one country can have a singular culture, I think there is a real support in Brazil for young children and the families that care for them, in more so than in many other countries in which I've worked. So I think that starting from that place of strength, you've seen these policies roll out. You see Bolsa Família, you see Criança Feliz. There's incredible federal as well as state and municipal level support for early childhood programs that cross sectors, that cross disciplines, that integrate health and social protection and education in a way that I don't see replicated in many other countries around the world, including in the United States, where I'm based. So I think that is a huge area of strength, and I largely thank to the NCPI as well as many on this call for the progress that's been made. I'll agree with Aisha and Flavio that the devil is in the details of those policies, right? So even if you have a very strong, high-level policy, what that looks like on the ground is going to be a completely different story. And so I think that there's been a lot of challenges with Criança Feliz in particular, which is a very complex program, but doesn't have a whole lot of guidance associated with it for how to actually implement on the ground and actually reach scale. And so from what I've heard, there are some inequities that are already being amplified through these policies where municipalities or areas with higher levels of resources are able to get home visiting services out, and they're rolling them out well. And other areas where the resources are more limited are not yet reaching the most vulnerable populations. And so one of the challenges that I see is making sure that our policies, as well-intentioned as they may be, are not actually exacerbating inequities and making them worse if we are not providing the types of resources, both social resources as well as financial resources that are needed to support them. The other particular challenge, which is a global challenge at this point, which hasn't come up yet in the conversation, is COVID. So how do we continue to support children and families in the context of this global pandemic, this global crisis that is shutting down services out of health necessity and leaving children behind? So in addition to this generation that Marcia just mentioned of Zika-affected children and families, we are now going to have another generation of children affected by this pandemic, even if not biologically affected through the infection itself, through the social and environmental consequences and economic consequences of the crisis that we're all facing. So I'm hopeful that we as a global community can start sharing better knowledge, and we can use centers like this one to share resources and information across context in order to understand what is working, how to bring things to scale, and how to make things more efficient, not just Brazil, but globally.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought COVID because it was right here on my notes. I was going to bring this up. Of course, I was going to talk about COVID, right, folks? But I think it's important to highlight that NCPI put together a document in record time. I don't even know how many hands work on this document, like 20 people or so. And we basically reflected on the many different impacts COVID could have on early childhood development. And we tried to do a comprehensive job. So we talked about violence, mental health, parenting, many different schooling, many different issues that could happen. So I think that's one document that NCPI was really proud that we were able to put together right in the beginning. But then comes the other question: how do we actually evaluate what is happening and how do we respond quickly. I mean, we've been talking since the beginning, responding fast is better. So acting early is better. So how can we address some of those challenges? So I want to try to get into more in depth into this issue and bring in the context that we have in many areas in Brazil of very severe inequalities, urban violence that really stops the work of people working with children, and now all of this in the context of COVID with mental health issues of parents and children, and what we call long COVID, which are the health consequences that people keep having for a long time. And we're starting to have some reports that this also happens in children, not just adults. So I would challenge each one of you to reflect a little bit. If you imagine that the new created center could do a contribution right now to address those issues, what do you think would be one way to proceed? So I'll let you self-select who wants to take this first. I'm going to give you 2 seconds and I'm going to pick one. Aisha, there you go.
I'm happy to start, and I'm sure that both Flavia and Dana will have much more to say. I think that when we think about child development, obviously, we think about the child at the center, and that's the end goal of all the work we're doing. But I think we also need to be very intentional and have explicit questions and explicit strategies around how we're supporting the caregivers around the child. So that includes the well-being of the parents, the mental health of the parents, but also how do we reduce the stresses that are coming into the household. And I think similarly, we have to do that with our frontline providers. They are exposed to the exact same stresses that the parents are exposed to, perhaps more so because they are going to the doorstep in the terms of the community health agents. So they're dealing with a range of households with complex adversities, but then also coming back to their own households with those similar complex adversities. So how do we support community health agents, teachers, childcare workers, to ensure that they are able to be well themselves and also continue to effectively deliver the programs that we're asking them to deliver for children, for families.
Thank you. Flavio?
I couldn't agree more with what Aisha just said. In a collaboration that we have in Ceará, in another one that we have here in the United States, Aisha, at the end of the first year, the number of frontline workers that had become mentally, they developed some mental health problem because of the issues that they had to deal with, was something that, in retrospect, we should have forecast, but we didn't. And then obviously this becomes an important aspect of it. The other thing as well is also the physical health, because a lot of the work sometimes, especially if you're in childcare, that can be very taxing as well. So I completely agree with what you're saying. I would say something else from the economics point of view. Think of funding. I mean, an important problem to sustain programs in the long run is to identify sources of funding so that are stable, permanent, that remunerate the frontline workers according to the productivity that they have. And I see that as a major problem in early childhood in the United States, and I see that in Brazil as well. And it's extreme. All of this work requires human capital. To build human capital, you need to have human capital. You can't build a successful early childhood program without having the frontline workers having the right type of human capital. And human capital costs a lot of money. And we can't do it unless we actually have sustainable, forecastable sources of funding. Start thinking about that immediately, because if you don't solve that problem, innovation you can innovate temporarily, but it's not sustainable in the long run.
Great. Dana?
I would totally agree. So I'm a developmental psychologist. So typically I think about individual children and what we can do to support individual children. But I think COVID is a case where the best thing that we can do to support children is to support those who are caring for them. And I think, I have an almost 2-year-old, so I have some personal experience about parenting young children in the context of a pandemic. And even despite all of the resources and supports that I have, it's an incredibly difficult time. The mental health challenges, physical stressors that come from this are immense. And you add to that the fact that early childhood care providers are generally under-resourced, under-supported, undervalued around the world, as Flavio has been mentioning and Aisha has been mentioning. You add a crisis on top of that, and I don't know how we as a society can expect them to continue on with the work that they are doing. So I absolutely agree. The first priority in the context of a pandemic has to be providing financial and social and health-related supports for parents, for frontline childcare workers, as well as those investments in those broader systems. So in the United States, one challenge is that we're having right now is that early childcare programs, which are not typically publicly funded here, are falling apart. So they don't have the tuition dollars coming in. They don't have the same number of resources coming in the door. At the same time, their operating costs are increasing because they're required to have fewer children and more caregivers. They have to have more space per child. The cleaning requirements and sanitation requirements are going up, and that leads to early childhood education providers closing their doors. So that's not only something that's affecting people in the immediate future, that's going to affect the entire system of early care and education for decades to come. And it's very difficult to recover from. So I think those public investments, those public responses are absolutely critical. And my hope is that as more light is shined on this crisis, that also will be motivation to support more sustainable systems in the long term. Childcare has been in crisis for decades. This is not a new issue. I think COVID has just amplified the extent to which this crisis is really affecting our ability to proceed as an economy and as a society.
I'm glad you mentioned the issue about the focus not being really on the individual. Nothing about COVID has to be individual. The decisions may be individual, but everything has a consequence at a community level. So using a mask, taking vaccine, that's a humanitarian decision, not an individual decision. Unfortunately, that's not what's happening in many places, but that's about being very selfish and other words that I'm not going to use right now. So let's move on. Let's think about some successful public policies for early childhood from Brazil or worldwide that we should look at and we should learn from to improve early childhood development. So I'm going to start with Dana now.
Great. So I think we've already mentioned some of the real success stories. We've mentioned Bolsa Familia. We've mentioned Criança Feliz as a real sort of flagship set of enterprises. So I'm happy to let others sort of talk about those in greater detail. Another one I wanted to flag from an education angle is the Base Nacional, the sort of common curriculum of Brazil that was developed a few years ago. And from an early childhood perspective, I am always really encouraged to see that common curriculum, the core sort of outcomes that are being prioritized in early education settings in Brazil are not just letters and numbers and academic content, but there's a huge focus on social and emotional skills. So kids' ability to understand themselves, to understand social relationships with one another, to pay attention, to reflect their own emotions and understand the emotions of others. Those sorts of milestones and skills are not prioritized in a lot of educational contexts around the world. And they are the foundation, again, of the later learning that takes place in and out of the classroom across the lifespan. So that was one from an education angle that I was very encouraged to see coming out of Brazil. And it's another place where when I'm teaching or talking about positive examples of educational curricula and priorities is one I always try to amplify.
Aisha? And this can be examples from abroad as well. So you bring a lot of experience also from Pakistan, Aisha. So,
thank you. I'd probably focus on two examples. I recently had the privilege to interview the former Minister of Finance in Sri Lanka. And I think it was an incredibly great case study example of how knowledge mobilization and advocacy and communication at that highest policy level led to changes and protected budget lines exactly to the issues that we're talking about in terms of publicly subsidized childcare in Sri Lanka, which made the case for not just for child development, which was perhaps gaining less traction at the time in Sri Lanka, but actually women's participation in the workforce, which seemed to be the pull or the win-win for the finance ministry. And I think that's particularly important because sometimes when we talk about investments in child development, we think about long-term returns. And I think sometimes we also need to be able to show what our more short-term gains can be. And so I thought that example in Sri Lanka was great. From my own work in Pakistan, I think the lesson that is key is long-term partnerships. And so the initial work we did with community health workers, or in Pakistan they're referred to as lady health workers, was started in 2008 and 2009. But we had to continue that partnership with government. There was not a readiness to change policies or a readiness to integrate the learnings into the nation's sort of the national strategy. And it's only now in the last 2 years that that's started to happen, where we're seeing policy evolution, we're seeing the curriculum of the Lady Health Worker program actually integrate a parenting intervention. And I think the key takeaway from that is, how do we maintain long-term funding partnerships and long-term partnerships between that sort of triad of policy practitioners and researchers? And I think that we need to move away from that shift of sort of short-term project thinking to understanding scale and quality at scale is incremental and takes time.
I'm glad you mentioned about advocacy and public engagement, and that's something that the Núcleo Ciência pela Infância has been doing, and has been doing really well, putting the topic of early childhood development on the agenda, moving legislation, engaging with politicians, with researchers, and this has been done in collaboration with Harvard, the Center on the Developing Child, the David Rockefeller Center for Latin America Studies. So this component is a completely different scenario than it was 10 years ago. And I think that's important to mention as well, because it's part of all this effort that culminates today with this center. Flavio.
I think that let me put a challenge, because I'm hoping that we have like lots of graduate students participating here. But I would like to mention one Brazilian program that doesn't get mentioned as often as it should, but I believe has been very important in the Brazilian context, which is Pastoral da Criança. That goes back to the 1980s. And there is the belief that it really was an important and effective program in reducing child mortality in Brazil that was extremely high. And I think that as a Brazilian scientist, I would love to see a new generation of Brazilian researchers linking Pastoral da Criança's data to long-term data that we have nowadays. It sits in Brasilia as any good source of administrative data actually sits at right now. But I think that looking at this strategic rollout of this program in the 1980s and using that as some source of exogenous variation and understanding the long-term impacts of that particular program, I think that can actually be extremely important, not only for Brazil, but also for many other countries. I hope that people there are willing to take the challenge. I will also, make another, very selfish mention of my own work in Brazil. So for 7 years, I've been collaborating with the government of Ceará and in the home visitation program, really designed to improve or to reduce child abuse and neglect. We're going to have a paper released soon, and it really shows a major improvement a major reduction in child abuse and neglect, major improvement in some dimensions of cognitive skills as well. It's a program that started only in 18 municipalities. It's now in 60 municipalities with funding that it has now been approved by the state legislature. So it has permanent funding, and it will continue to serve those locations, those rural areas where Criança Feliz is not supposed to be present because of the strategic decisions of the Criança Feliz program. But I would love to see Brazilians really taking a deep look at Pastoral da Criança data set and see how that has actually impacted reduced child mortality in Brazil.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because a lot of people don't know, but Pastoral da Criança started to promote oral hair hydration therapy before the ministry did. They were the pioneers in Brazil. So they were the first ones to really make a solid contribution to reduce infant mortality. And I'm glad you mentioned Ceará. I mean, Brazil is a continental country. We have wonderful, successful experience that sometimes stay very localized and hidden. And we have to uncover those and try to see to what extent they can be scaled up. And in thinking of reducing infant mortality, Ceará is one of the states that did a phenomenal job, went from last place with high infant mortality to reduce it. And they won an award from UNICEF by doing this. Totally pioneer. And those experiences really have to be brought to light and to see why they were able to do. Why can't we do it in other places? So, all right, our time is coming up, but I want to give you 1 minute for some concluding remarks. And I want you to look at your wish list and make one recommendation to our new Brazilian Center for Early Childhood Development from your wish list. 1 minute, folks. Dana.
Great. 1 minute is hard to summarize all of the complexity and all of the wishes that I have for Brazil, for the center, for the world. Okay. So I'm running out of time. So I will end with a quote that I love from Marian Wright Endelman, which is that children don't come in pieces. And I think too often our policies, our programs are designed to be very piecemeal. We have a program to address nutrition. We have a program to address health. We have a program to address education. And the truth of the matter is that children are holistic. They're integrated with their families, with their communities, with their nations. And so my plea is to continue as you have been in this center by recruiting people with expertise across a number of different areas, with connections, political connections across a number of different areas, and serve as a true center, as a nucleus, as a convening across those various disciplines and approaches so that we can treat child development as it should be, which is the center of our society.
Thank you. Flavio.
Well, my wish list is let's celebrate an agreement between the Texas Policy Lab and the CEPAP. That's my wish list right there, because as a Brazilian, I obviously have a lot of interest in promoting early childhood development in Brazil for sure. And the only thing that I'm going to say is I'm extremely honored to be here. I think that this is an important event in Brazil. And let me thank all the people who are behind it, FAPESP, Fundação Maria Cecília Souto Vidigal, and Insper. I know that Neste works tirelessly despite the very difficult circumstances of doing research in Brazil. He's really been a leader in the world, and I congratulate him for taking this new challenge. It's going to be a lot of fun. But there are going to be nights you're going to be kicking yourself like, oh my God, why did I get into this? And best of luck for all of you.
Aisha.
So my number one item on the wish list is nurture the next generation of Brazilian leaders in this. So you have wonderful leaders right now across research, policy, and programs. But I think the role of this center is going to be truly transformative in working with the next generation of innovators and young researchers, not just in Brazil, but I think also as a platform to welcoming people that want to learn from Brazil from around the world.
All right, folks. So I hope all of you are as inspired as I am after all these discussions and really hopeful for everything that is yet to come with the new center. I want to thank all three of you for your time, for sharing your knowledge and experience with us, and for all the work you do to advance the science of early childhood development. Thank you so much. Back to Naércio.
Thanks very much, Marcia, for coordinating this fantastic session. Thanks very much, Aisha, Flavio, and Dana. We'll surely use this excellent advice you gave us. So just to finalize the session, I will briefly talk about the activities of the new center so that everyone in the public knows about our activities, our aims. And I will start by saying that what I consider to be one of the most important problems of Brazilian society, which is inequality of opportunities. So we would aim that every child that's born in Brazil would have the same opportunity to achieve its dreams and its projects. But unfortunately, this is not what happens nowadays. If you're born from a poor family, you have many more difficulties than if you were born in a more privileged family with a good background. And I think this has tremendous consequences for the society as a whole, both in terms of productivity, growth, inequality. So the main vision of the center is to promote better equality of opportunities, especially through a healthy early child development. So we know that in Brazil, despite many successful public policies we had in the last 30 years, as you notice, we had the Bolsa Família program, very successful in reducing extreme poverty. We have the family health strategy, very successful in reducing mortality among youngsters and adults. We have the Criança Feliz program, as Dana cited, and which has been very successful in visiting problems and promoting early child development. But despite all these advances, we still have many problems in Brazil. So just to cite one, our performance in the PISA education world test scores is very, very poor. So we are among the richest countries in the world, but our kids do very, very bad at PISA. So to what extent is this due to problems in early child development? I think we don't know that. In fact, we don't have a lot of measures of early child development in Brazil. So we have good education index, we have good health indicators, but we don't have indicators of early child development. So without having these indicators, we cannot link early child development problems with education problems, with labor market problems. So our center will try to fill in these gaps. And we know, for example, that among youngsters in the labor market, around 20% of youngsters are not studying, either studying or working. So what are they doing? This is what they call the name. So this is a huge problem. And if these youngsters don't have motivation and don't have knowledge and social emotional abilities to pursue their careers, this has a big effect in terms of productivity and growth in the long run. Because Brazil, as we know, have had productivity problems. So we were basically stagnated in the past 30 years. So I think that early child development is a foundation that can change the prospects of kids and for the country as a whole in the long term. So if we can do anything to change a little bit the scenario, to try to improve on measurement on ECD, on try to redesign public policies, taking into account these different measures of ECD to achieve better cost benefit. So we'll be very happy. And so we have this 10-year, it's a long-term project, and we have funding, we have help from all the people that were here. So we hope to achieve that. In more specific terms, the first phase of the program, we want to measure early child development. So we have a multidisciplinary team. I think this is one of the main characteristics of the new center. We have physicians, we have economists, we have education guys, we have psychologists, we have guys on public administration. We have, and they are some of the best scientists in their areas in the country. And they're working together, and they have been working together for the last 10 years, just for free, just because they believe in the importance of early child development. So we want to use all this expertise to gather different measures of ECD. We want to use the measures provided by the children booklet. We want to do surveys with parents and families. We want to use specific methods to measure early child development. We're going to measure the quality of sleep, the sleep pattern of kids. We want to also collect biological measures and also try to observe neural networks. So we have a complete set of different measures of early child development. We want to correlate these measures to see how they work, and also use them to predict future problems in learning, in social emotional ability. So one phase, the first phase of the project is collecting data on early child development and measuring, and this I think will be very important. Then we use all these measures as a baseline to design new interventions that can change the way public policies are designed in order to improve their impact on children and on the future youngsters. So in order to do this, we want to redesign a family health strategy. We want to, in order to take into account measures of early child development that we'll collect. So we intend to run a policy, first try with around 4 municipalities in the state of São Paulo. We intend to follow cohorts of children born in these municipalities, for which we're going to collect these measures, and then we're going to do the interventions, which will be evaluated using randomized control times. On top of the intervention designed to improve the policies, the family health strategy, we also want to do interventions to improve parenting using new technologies, text messages, videos with parents, so that they can know more about early child development and how to proceed with interacting with their kids to improve early child development, and also work on the supply side, training the community health agents about the importance of ECD, on how to use this new measurement we want to provide to improve the visitations and achieve a better outcome in terms of ECD. So we have also these 3 interventions, which we are going to evaluate using the baseline measures of ECD, and then we will measure the cohort children again after the interventions to see whether they worked in terms of improving ECD. So this will be a very important part of the project. And another part that we weren't expecting is the COVID pandemic, as you talked in the previous session. When we designed the project for the center, of course, there was no pandemic. It was 2019. But now we have this huge health problem affecting the whole world, and Brazil is being much affected. So we want to redesign some of our policies to take into account the effects of COVID. We're going to, of course, survey the families and their kids. We plan to compare municipalities that were more affected by COVID and by social distance measures with other municipalities that weren't, so that we can compare the effects of COVID on early child development, and try to redesign policies to deal with the situations. As Marcia said, there could be long-term effects of COVID. I also would like to emphasize that research is very important, but it's not the only component of our center. We want to disseminate the importance of early child development among students, undergraduate students, graduate students, postdocs, also the public officials in the health and education sectors. And it has to be intersectorial, as Aisha and Dana rightfully suggested. We have to deal with social policies, with health, and also education policies. So there's an important dissemination project of the center, and also technological transfer. Once we have an app that has all this information on different measures of early child development, merged with administrative data on education and health, we want to empower the public sector workers on how to use this information to achieve better outcomes for kids. So the role of new technologies is also very important in our project. So I want to end my short contribution by thanking again all the sponsors of this project. We want to thank David Rockefeller Center for Latin American Studies for providing us with 2 postdoc scholarships. We want to thank all of you that were here today, FAPESP, USP, Fundação Maria Cecília, the state government, of course, Insper. And I mean, it's a huge endeavor. It's like 2 years ago, I decided, well, what am I going to do with my career? So I said, well, I think this is a nice thing to do, a bit of contribution to society, use all the knowledge we have. So I'm planning to dedicate most of my time in the next 10 years to the center. And I also have to thank the other researchers in the center. We have an executive committee. We have 10 associate members of the center. Ana Chiesa, which was part of the whole initiative, cannot be here with us today, which is really important, and I would like to thank you. So I think with the contribution of so many great people interested in equality, in society, in equality of opportunities, this will work. So thank you very much for all of you. And I hope we will see each other very soon in the near future. And with that, I will finish this session today. And I hope everyone has enjoyed the session, and look forward to the next steps of our center. Thank you very much. Everyone. Okay.
Thanks.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you so much, and congratulations.
Take care.